An airport that moved more earth than any project in Australia's history is rising in Western Sydney. More than 26 million cubic meters of soil have already been shifted to shape its runways and roads, enough to fill 10,000 Olympic pools, and this is only the beginning. Western Sydney International Airport, a $5 billion development, will run 24 hours a day with a 3.7-kilometer runway built to handle the world's largest aircraft. It will open with the power to serve 10 million passengers a year and grow toward 80 million by 2060. For a city stretched to its limits by an old airport trapped beside suburbs and the sea, the new site is more than a construction zone. It's a reset button. But why did Sydney need a project this bold? And why now? For years, one thing has quietly held Sydney back: its main airport. At Sydney Kingsford Smith, planes line up in the sky, queues snake through the terminal, and there is almost no room left to grow. The airport had its first flight in 1919 and officially opened in 1920. It sits only 8 kilometers from the CBD, boxed in by suburbs on 3 sides and Botany Bay on the 4th. What once felt like the perfect location has become a tight container. To expand, the airport would need new land reclaimed from the bay or nearby homes cleared, options that are both costly and unpopular. And with a strict night curfew and hard caps on flight numbers, how many more planes could the runways really take each day? By the early 2000s, more than 25 million passengers a year were moving through Kingsford Smith, and demand for flights in the Sydney region were forecast to roughly double over the next 20 years. Studies confirmed that even without a curfew, the existing airport could not handle that future load. At the same time, Western Sydney was booming, with more than 2 million people already in the West and another million expected by the 2030s. Yet most of these residents still had to cross the entire city to catch a plane. How long could that gap last? The idea of a second airport has been around since the 1960s. Governments debated sites and wrote reports for decades. Badgerys Creek, about 44 kilometers west of the CBD, was identified early, and land was gradually acquired. But real progress kept slipping away. A third runway at Kingsford Smith opened in 1994, buying time but not a long-term solution. In 2012, a joint study again pointed to Badgerys Creek as a clear site for a new airport, thanks to its open land, distance from dense housing, and links to major road and rail corridors. And after all those years, the question finally shifted from should we build it to what will it take to make it real? In 2014, the Australian government finally confirmed the decision. 4 years later, construction began on Western Sydney International, Nancy Bird Walton Airport, a curfew-free hub designed to run all night and anchor a wider Western Sydney Aerotropolis. The aim is clear: ease pressure on an overworked harborside airport and bring global connections and jobs closer to the city's west. So how do you turn a rough paddock on the Cumberland Plain into a smart 24/7 gateway that can reshape a whole region? Once the decision was made, the first task at Badgerys Creek was not building a terminal. It was reshaping the land. Western Sydney International became the largest earth-moving project in Australia, with around 25 to 26 million cubic meters of soil cut, shifted, and compacted across the site. At peak, more than 250 heavy machines worked across the Cumberland Plain, moving close to 1 million cubic meters of earth every month to carve flat platforms for the runway, taxiways, roads, and drainage. But all that digging and moving led to a big question. Would the new surface be strong enough for the world's biggest jets? To answer it, engineers leaned on smart reuse. About 5.5 million tons of excavated sandstone from other Sydney tunneling projects were brought to the site and used under runways, taxiways, and aprons. That rock helped build a rigid base while cutting waste and truck trips. New erosion control measures kept this man-made landscape stable even during heavy rain. On this strong engineered foundation sits the airfield. So, how do you start building something that can take the weight of the biggest planes in the world? You start with the runway. The main runway is 3.7 kilometers long and 45 meters wide, built to handle everything from small domestic jets to fully loaded international aircraft. More than 120,000 cubic meters of concrete and asphalt were poured to shape pavements that can survive decades of use, even in the extreme summer heat. Engineers used a special true slip forming method for concrete for the first time in Australia. This allowed long, smooth pours with fewer joints and much higher quality. Around the runway, taxiways and airside roads form a full network so planes can move fast between gates, aprons, and the main strip. But how do you keep all this working when the weather turns bad? That's where lighting and navigation systems come in. Over 3,000 ground lights, including high-intensity approach lights, connect with Cat 3B level navigation systems, so planes can land safely even in fog or low visibility. Rapid exit taxiways help planes clear the runway right after landing. This lets Western Sydney International reach high hourly movement rates without needing more than one runway in the first stage. Right beside the runway stands the terminal, the part every traveler sees first. The main terminal's floor area is as big as more than a dozen football fields and will handle both domestic and international flights under one roof. Swing gates can switch from domestic to international use in about 30 minutes, letting the terminal follow demand as airlines grow toward an early capacity of up to 10 million passengers a year. Inside, the design mixes high-tech systems with a strong sense of place. Huge glass walls pull in natural light and open views toward the Blue Mountains. Above the departure hall, a flowing aluminum ceiling hangs in soft waves. It is made from hundreds of thousands of meters of aluminum battens and tons of steel. Its curved shape reflects the ridges of the land outside. A long sandstone wall, built from locally quarried blocks, ties the building back to the sandstone landscape around it, while tall entry columns create a shaded veranda at the front door. And what about sustainability? That is built into almost every part of the design. Rainwater from nearly 2 hectares of roof is collected inside the entry columns and stored in a 700 kiloliter tank for cooling systems, bathrooms, and landscape watering. Nearly 9,000 solar panels line the roof and walkways to supply alternative power. Across the wider project, about 96% of material has been kept out of landfill. Inside the terminal, the focus shifts to how people move. But how do you make this easy for everyone? Common use self-service kiosks and bag drop points let any passenger use any station. A 5-kilometer automated baggage system can process about 2,000 bags an hour at high speed in its initial configuration. That's a lot of bags moving fast. Smart boarding bridges and automated systems through the terminal are designed to make the path from check-in to gate quicker and more predictable. It all works together so people don't waste time standing in long lines. None of this works without strong links to the rest of the city. So how does the airport stay connected? Western Sydney International is being built as the core of a wider transport network. On the roads, the new toll-free M12 motorway will connect the airport to the M7 and other major routes, while the Bringley Road and the Northern Road are being widened to handle future traffic. On rails, the Sydney Metro Western Sydney Airport line is under construction as a 23-kilometer driverless metro between St. Mary's, the airport, and the new Bradfield City Centre, with 6 new stations, including 2 inside the airport precinct. All of this is built so people can reach the terminal with less stress and more speed. The airport is also the anchor for a much bigger economic plan. The Western Sydney Aerotropolis and Bradfield City Centre around it are planned as hubs for aerospace, defense, manufacturing, health, research, freight, and logistics. Over the coming decades, they are expected to support up to 200,000 jobs across the Western Parkland city. The airport itself is forecast to create thousands of jobs during construction and tens of thousands more during its first years of operation across aviation, retail, ground services, catering, and cargo. This isn't only an airport, it's the start of a whole new city. With change on this scale, controversy is always likely. And what's the biggest concern? Western Sydney International will be curfew-free, unlike Kingsford Smith, and that raises hard questions about nighttime noise. The site also lies within a few kilometers of the Blue Mountains World Heritage Area, so environmental groups and residents have asked what increased air traffic will mean for wilderness, wildlife, and water catchments. Governments have responded with draft flight paths, noise maps, insulation schemes, and promises of careful route design. But many locals are waiting to see what it feels like once jets are overhead. There have been governance concerns as well. A land purchase at the nearby Leppington Triangle for a future second runway triggered an audit that found major flaws in how the deal was handled, even though a later police probe ended without criminal charges. The episode raised questions about transparency and stewardship of public money. More broadly, Sydney's two-airport model carries risk. Airlines prefer to concentrate operations at a single hub. Western Sydney will need to win and hold enough routes to meet forecasts that see the airport handling tens of millions of passengers a year, all while labor and material costs stay under pressure. Even with these uncertainties, the transformation on the ground is clear. A once quiet paddock now holds a finished runway and a completed terminal linked to new motorways and rail lines that are reshaping Western Sydney's map. For local workers, it is a once-in-a-lifetime build. For the city, it is a chance to shift its center of gravity and bring jobs and global links closer to where millions of people actually live. As Western Sydney International moves from hard hats to boarding passes later this decade, one question will hang over every departure. Will this new $5 billion airport simply relieve the pressure on a crowded harborside gateway, or will it truly spark the new Western city that planners have promised? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video.